All right, guys, we're live on radio, and of course, we're live on the Big 1050 stream, and we're live in 5, 4, 3, 2.
And we are back on the Michigan Insider on the Big 1050 WTKA online at the big1050.com. No Sam today, as I mentioned earlier in the show a couple of times. Sam actually is emceeing the Greg Harden Celebration of Life that starts at 11 a.m. over at the Chrysler Center. So hopefully we'll see you over there. Open to the public, free. Do not need a ticket to get in. And doors open, I believe they said, at 10:30 for the event coming up at 11 o'clock at the Chrysler Center. There'll be speakers from across,
and they'll be streaming it on YouTube as well.
And it'll be streaming on YouTube. You can watch it there as well. There'll be speakers that are going to be talking across his 5 decades of work and the great life that Greg led, and some great stories. And Sam, I know, is very privileged, and he's feeling the privilege of being able to MC that event today. So we'll see Sam over there at 11 o'clock. In the meantime, it is time for the MGoBlog Roundtable here on the show, and we've got Brian Cook. Good morning, Brian. How are you?
I am well.
Seth Fisher, how are you? Good morning.
Good morning.
And Craig Ross.
I'm trying to do well.
All right. Well,
it's been a struggle.
That. Craig is playing hurt. We appreciate that. Battle through it, Craig, and hang in there. And I'm going to actually start this conversation the same way we started our conversation last week. We'll get to the football in a little bit, but we started this conversation last week talking basketball, and we were leading up to that exhibition game down at Little Caesars Arena. Had a chance to go down there. I watched it. I don't know if you guys had a chance to see any of that, but I actually want to take it to the future part of it. It seems like Dusty May's kind of hot right now in the recruiting show. Winters Grady, Oscar Goodman. That's pretty, Brian. Recruiting in basketball is pretty hot at the moment.
Yeah, and you get a kid named Winters, and then a guy with a mullet who's a ginger from New Zealand. Like I am hyped up not just about the players, but how angry like opposing players are going to be when these guys rain in threes at a ridiculous rate. Like just the haterade recruitment level here is off the charts. So props to Dusty for that. But yeah, like as I've said before, it seems like Dusty has really hit the ground running. Not only did he assemble a basketball team basically out of nothing, but it looks like, I mean, he's locked down 2 guys who are in that sweet spot where they're going to be really good college players, but they got a good possibility of being around for 3, maybe 4 years. You know, the scouting report on Winters Grady starts off with, yeah, he's a knockdown shooter. He's a 42% 3-point shooter, 90% from the line. And then the most beautiful line in every scouting report for a shooter I can ever imagine, which is good, not great athlete. Give it to me, baby. He's not 6'8". The NBA are going to be like, oh, there's only 3 of these people on the planet. We got to take him in the second round, even if he's got like issues. So I'm very happy. And then, you know, they're swinging for the fences with a couple of guys who are in the top 30 who Michigan seems to be in a good spot with. So I like having that base. And then if you want to sprinkle in a Trey McKinney, then that's something you can do. So I was encouraged by the exhibition game as well. So, you know, so far so good for Dusty May.
Yeah, the thing I like about Grady a lot is he likes to shoot the mid-range shot. So he has a lot of Roddy Gale in him. That's a player I like. 2, it's a player, as Brian points out, the NBA isn't going to be all over at year 1 or 2. He may be around for a few years. The little bit I looked at him, he sort of reminded me a bit of Roddy Gale. So we'll see, but I haven't seen enough. Goodman, I haven't looked at all. All I know is what Brian just said. He's from New Zealand. I haven't looked at his tape. I will now that he's committed. I know he's been very successful in international games. And his stat lines are fairly rounded. He scores some, he rebounds some, he assists some. Apparently, from the writing on him, he can handle the ball at 6'7", 6'8". So that's all nice. McKinney, I think we actually lead for right now. The feeling I get is we lead for him. MSU is out of it. He's, I think, a Michigan kid who's at IMG. He's probably a borderline 5-star, 4.5, 5-star guy. And then the guy that they need a center. They've got to, because they're going to lose Vlad, of course. Whether they'll have Wolf next year is a question, but regardless, they're going to need a center. And there's a guy who's a phenomenal player, and I'm blocking on his name. I think he's in Las Vegas. Michigan is in on him, but
Xavier Stanton.
Stanton, thank you. The competition there though isn't ordinary. Do you know, Brian, who else is competing for him? It's
it's UNLV and BYU, which is a real weird combination of
Right.
schools.
Yeah, I watched his tape extensively, and I said, yeah, super athletic, can't shoot very well, but can do everything you want a big guy to do. Great shot blocker, rebounder, moves his feet. So on the recruiting front, it's all good. We could talk. Seth, did you see the game? Do you want to weigh in on the game?
Yeah, I mean, it's close to what we thought was going to be. A couple things stood out. One, the ball does not stick on this team at all.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, every single time there's somebody open or somebody getting open, and like everyone knows what to do with the ball. And this is something we saw in their statistics and when we were talking about in the preview. And then you watch and you're just like, man, everyone knows what to do with the ball, right? The ball goes to Danny Wolf, and all of a sudden it's like another point guard. It's just he's 7 feet tall, right? And Reuben Jones is bringing the ball up a whole bunch, and he's running point more than Donaldson is. And it's interesting to see how they play. Roddy Gale's defense, I think we haven't talked about that enough. That was something that stood out, the way he plays. Sam Walters is a guy that I think we've been mentioning him, but as an off the bench player, and I think there's certain games that he's just going to play the 4, right? And
I don't think that's going to be the case. You're
he's a guy you say go to that one spot in the corner and don't move.
He's doing more than that though.
Going
to the basket, and
but that's like. He's a stand in the corner and shoot guy, and like he'll occasionally go to the basket. But what happened when he got to the basket is he turned the ball over. So he's going to work on that. But his role this year, as in year 2 as a college player, is just going to be that, and that's all Michigan needs from him, because they have 3 ball handlers at the 1 through 3. They have when Wolf's at the 5, they've got a great passer at the 5. So there's going to be plenty of opportunities for him to sit in a corner and shoot, and 4 or 6 in his opener. So that's, I think, excellent, obviously. But the thing that did stand out is the point guard on this team is, I don't know. They had 3 guys in their starting lineup who were the point guards for their teams last year functionally. I know Gale didn't technically play point guard for Ohio State, but his stats look like Ohio State's point guard. So that was his hallmark at FAU as well, is that he wanted to have lots of guys who can handle the ball. He wanted to have secondary playmakers, guys who can attack closeouts, and not just attack closeouts to drive and score, but also to pass. And I think we saw some sloppiness in this game, which is natural early in the year. We saw some turnovers, especially early in the second half. But in terms of bad shots being taken, I think there were a few Namari Burnett jacks early in the second half that I didn't like. But other than that, they were getting good shots. And that's an interesting and difficult thing to do against an Oakland zone that is, sui generis. There's no other team that plays it, and maybe they're not very good at it this early in the year. But for Michigan to comprehensively attack the middle of that zone and get productive passes out of it, and get a series of dunks, great shots, and off actions that they drew up and used. There were a couple early dunks for Vlad Golden. If you go look at those, they are screening and rescreening in ways that are confusing to the Oakland defense. And I thought that was you can't get too out over your skis, right? Because Michigan apparently beat Marquette in a scrimmage last year. They came out 3-0, and they beat the St. John's team that would make the tourney comprehensively. So, you don't want to get too excited, but it was nice to have guards again. Last year there was one guard on the team, because I don't consider Namari Burnett a real guard. Namari Burnett is a small forward.
Yeah, there's a moment where Namari pulls up and shoots a long 3 right at the top of the clock, and you're just like, well, I'm glad that guy's our 7th or 8th or 9th guy, right? He's fine out there in hitting that role, and that was the moment where I was like, wow, that was our that was it. Was at times our best player last year.
Well, yeah, and for the most part, I do think that the 4 is going to be someone other than Danny Wolf, right? Because Vlad Golden played 25 minutes a game for FAU last year. Danny Wolf is an upgrade on the backup center for FAU. So if they want to play fast, the way that you do that with bigs is you don't give them 35 minutes a game. So 15 of Wolf's minutes are going to be at the 5, and then maybe he'll have another 15. So it's like the biggest question on the team is like who plays at the 4 and how do they defend? And I think you have different options here because if you have an opposition team where you can just hide a guy, then you can put Walters out there and just rain in threes. If they have guys that you need to check, you can get Burnett or Jones there, and maybe they'll have a slight size disadvantage if you guys 6'7" or whatever. But those guys have long arms; they're athletic. They can harass other players in ways that defy a size gap. So I feel like they have options and they'll be flexible. They've got multiple ball handlers. They're not really dependent on any one player. So if someone gets in foul trouble, like other than I guess Golden, like I wouldn't be like, oh no, what are we going to do? And even Golden has a backup who is, one of the top 10 players in the portal. So like, I feel like this is a team that should make the tournament. I know it's early to be saying that, but
you mentioned that. I'll jump in. Joel, it's way too early for bracketologies, but I did click on Lenardi's just because why not? And he actually has Michigan as an 8 seed. In comparison, he has MSU as a 7 seed. I know no games have been played, but since you brought it up, I mentioned that Lenardi did have his first preseason bracketology. That's way too early. And you're right, Brian. You don't want to get in over your skis. It's an exhibition game. But all the things that we talked about last week here about, the construction of the team and putting it together, it was kind of on display. I'm curious your thoughts on guys that we hadn't seen a ton of. What about Kaysen? What did you guys think of Kaysen in the game? I really enjoyed watching him play outside of his foul trouble.
Oh, Craig likes him a lot, I know.
Yeah, I like him a whole lot. I mean, I think he's still rough, and he did have fouls. I think he had 4 fouls in the game.
I think he eventually
fouled out. But I kind of like that on this team. Because you had both Donaldson and Kaysen and Reuben Jones and Gale not given an inch on defense. I mean, they were up in their grills and we're not giving an inch and weren't getting beat to the hole. I mean, it was very rare. So, I mean, and I feel like they can do that because they have that quality of depth. I can't believe I'm saying this, and Brian has been giving me some crap about it recently. So, but I like the fact that they're able to do this with this team to play that hard defensively. The one thing that Brian mentioned that I want to stress is that Oakland plays a really weird defense, and it's hard it's hard to prepare for it, let alone hard to prepare for with a whole new team. And last year, Oakland, they're mostly a new team. They have 2 guys from their top 6 or 7 back. That was it. But last year they were 24-9 and beat Kentucky in the NCAA tournament. And Kentucky was clueless as to how to attack that zone. And with Michigan, even though it was a new team for Oakland, by and large, I mean, it was shooting fish in a barrel. I mean, what did they score? 92 points?
Thereabouts, yeah.
Yeah, 92-48 or something like that. I mean, Camphy is a great coach. He's a Hall of Fame coach. You can't say enough good things about Oakland and his program. And he'll have that team going as it goes along, I think, because there is some talent there. But that was a chainsaw. And so that element of it makes me very optimistic. What makes me not optimistic or questioning is, well, oh yeah, okay, we saw some of this last year, but last year what we saw was a team that couldn't miss in the first 3 or 4 games. Everything they threw up went in the basket. And that wasn't so much the case here. These were wide open, good looks from guys who can shoot the ball. You saw Will Cheddar, who we said when we talked about basketball last time, I said, he's a really good shooter and a really good offensive player. Well, on this team, he has a definitive role because his defensive liabilities aren't quite as profound given the guys who are around him. And he had a nice game. He made his shots, but Will Cheddar's going to make shots because he can do that. And so there's just a lot there. Kaysen, we'll see. I mean, I think in the end at Michigan, whether he's a 1 or a 2, I don't know. It may not matter, but I think he can play both, and I think he's going to be the deal.
He's on a Dustin May team, so right, they're going
Right.
to have 3 1s. It does feel a lot different to take like 2 fouls from a guard and be like, oh, we're okay.
Yeah.
Right? that was not something that was happening last year. I do want to point out that like Oakland was not like Oakland has maybe one player I think who's going to be Big Ten caliber.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can only play who you're playing against. So but the point about the aggressiveness on the perimeter is well taken because they can do that, right? They weren't able to do that with Doug last year because, like, you know, if he went out, they literally didn't have another guard. But the one commonality between the Beeline era and the Howard era, statistically, was the fact that they never ever forced turnovers. And that you can have a great defense without forcing turnovers. Michigan did it under both Beeline and Howard. But they had an emphasis on not sending guys to the line, you know, backing off a little bit and allowing shots over you. And to a large extent, contested shots from the mid-range are good shots to give up, and you don't have to force a ton of turnovers. But what I liked from Michigan's defense in this game is that they were aggressive on the perimeter and they were disruptive, but they weren't gambling. They were in positions where they were able to create some turnovers and some open court opportunities. But what they weren't doing is they weren't jumping in passing lanes and allowing Oakland, you know, uncontested drives to the basket. So it felt like they had a good balance of aggressiveness, but without getting out over their skis. And it's going to be interesting to see how this develops because Michigan brought in Mike Boynton, who was a defensive specialist as a head coach at Oklahoma State. And, you know, for years under Beeline, we're like, this guy needs a defensive coordinator. And once he got one, things really looked up on that side of the ball. And it feels like Dusty May like just skipped that first phase of the Beeline era where he's like, I need a defensive coordinator. And I don't know exactly how things are going to pan out because you got questions at the 4, you got questions at the 5 a little bit because Golden, you know, he's not a hard hedge center. They hedge a little bit, but drop coverage is going to be the most common occurrence for Michigan. But
I hope not. You know, they had 0 drop coverage in this game.
That's not accurate.
It is.
No,
they never dropped.
They
never dropped.
They dropped.
All right, I'll look at the game again, but I don't think so.
So, but against bigger, more important opponents, Golden is going to have to play some drop coverage. But being able to flat hedge as a changeup is important. And like one thing that I think is going to be a big difference between the last few years of Michigan basketball and this one is that Michigan's guards are by and large huge.
Yeah.
So before it was like you had Eli Brooks out there and Doug and Mike Davis. No, that's not right. The kid from Princeton. Mike Smith. So you had some little guys, and I'd constantly be hitting up synergy and be like, okay, they're forcing a lot of contested jumpers off the dribble, which is what you want to do. And they're second percentile at defending those. So they were getting in good situations, but because they were running out guys who were generously listed at 5'11", those shots were a lot better than they usually are. And, you know, Donaldson's like not huge, but he's like a solid 6 foot, 6'1". And then Gale's a legit 6'4". Reuben Jones is 6'5". Damari Burnett is 6'5". Like those contested shots are going to be considerably more contested this year. And so if they force opponents into those, they should benefit from their ability to force those shots more than previous teams did.
Kempe teams are also big at guard, and they had a couple, you know, their guys were listed at 6'3", 6'4". They're shooting guard and point guard. So that was what really stuck out to me too, is that, you know, they were so used to even like a guy like Doug, where, you know, if the shot goes up, it's not that contested. And Donaldson is just he's he looks like a safety, right? Like these are the things that we've been talking about. But when you actually see it on the court, you're like, yeah, that guy looks like a defensive player. He looks like he looks like he can help the football team. And Roddy Gale's long arms are just always in the way. And Reuben Jones just looks like a spider wherever you go. There's just another arm popping up in the way. And even Will Cheddar kind of looked faster to me than I remember him.
Well, he lost 20 pounds.
Yeah, well, it looked like it. He looked kind of like a small forward. He's going to be a power forward, but he looked like a wing, not a partial center anymore.
Well, they did. I know I had a conversation about him the other day, and he, the old staff, they wanted him to essentially to beef up because they wanted him to be able to play a 5. And this staff, despite the fact that he actually did play a little bit of 5 in the game, in the exhibition game, they wanted him to slim down because they wanted him to play the 3-4, right? They don't want him to play the 5. So this strength coach slimmed him down. He's about 20 pounds, and he really bought into diet, exercise, change, and reshape the whole deal. And so Will does look like a different kid out on the floor.
Yeah,
and Wolf and Walters, I'm sorry. So that was the last piece. Wolf and Walters are just so long, right? Like there's a defensive ability that you have just by being that tall, where like if they go to shoot over you and it's just like whoop, big arm.
Yeah, what surprised me a bit was, because I didn't expect this, was how physical Wolf is. Wolf is willing to mix it up, and he was the best rebounder on the floor. And now he is almost 7 feet tall, so you'd expect him to rebound, but we've had 7-footers who, never get any rebounds. And not only was he getting the rebounds he should have gotten, he got rebounds that were in traffic that he was willing to fight for. And so I was super impressed with that. I was super impressed with what I had seen on this tape, which is he can move his feet. This is not some guy who cannot move his feet. He can do that. And so I was super impressed with him. We'll have an interesting game tomorrow night against Toledo. Toledo's in some ways a lot like Oakland. I think they played a 1-point game last year. Toledo won 20 games last year, and they've got two of the best 5 freshmen in the MAC came back for them. Their point guard, a guy named I think Sonny Wilson, and Javon Simmons was the MAC Freshman of the Year, 6'7" guy who's a good player. And they have a couple other guys who are okay. They have a 6'10" guy who's a freshman though, and a 6'9" guy whose name I can't pronounce because it has no. It's all
Andre
constant. No, it's something like.
Gregor Burchick.
Right.
Gregor Burchick. Yeah.
Gregor Burchick. Yeah. He. So they do have some size. They're always well coached. It'll it's an exhibition game, but it'll again be a reasonable test of what Michigan's got and how they're beginning to progress as a team.
Toledo, you remember playing them in the NIT. Well, anyone who watched the NIT game, you remember they're a 5-out team, and Javon Simmons is not very 5-out, but he's a 6'7" center. So you're going to see I think we're going to get to see a different version of Michigan this time, where Kempe wants to, get big and mess around with your defense. Toledo wants to spread you out. And, we'll see how that drop coverage works. We'll see how if Wolf can be out there at the 4 against a small team.
Yeah.
And we'll get to see what this team looks like if they want to play 4 guards.
Yeah. Very good point. So it's a different test, one where they may have somewhat different configurations on the floor. But I agree with your point.
All right, guys, that is the basketball part of the conversation. We will take a break and we will get to the football part of the conversation on the other side of the break here on the Michigan Insider with the MGoBlog Roundtable here on the Big 1050 WTKA, online at thebig1050.com.
And everybody leaves.
Clear on radio.
Easy for you to say, Miz.
Oh, I don't know what happened there. Apparently, I went dies. It went back to junior high again.
And it's charity game for the game tomorrow. So if you're going to the game, support CS Mott Children's Hospital.
Yes.
John Walls wants us to stay with basketball. It was fun. Versatility, length. They were entertaining, right? I mean, winning by a lot of points always helps, but you want to get up and down the floor. They were fun. Craig, you're muted.
One of the questions is, can we be good at basketball and football the same year? Evidently not.
Yeah, it was everything he said right from the beginning that he wanted his team to do. get up and down the court, be fun, shoot threes, play defense, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, checked every box from my eyes, at least. So for a first game, even though it's Oakland, I've seen exhibition games against really bad teams where Michigan just was dreadful and they had really good teams. So the level of organization was, impressive, to say the least.
It's a weird Big Ten year because, like, if you look at tournament,
Yeah.
all the Big Ten teams are like
Are
lined
right
up in the
together.
40s. Yeah, it's just like
Right.
there they all are. Right? Everyone from
Same on
USC to Michigan State. There's like
same on Ken Pump.
yeah.
We talked about this though. These teams are all restructured and new, and there's a
Yeah.
little bit of that in there.
Yep.
So we should remind everybody that Oscar Goodman, because I had a lot of people asking, he's not related to, that I can check, the Oscar Goodman who is the former mob lawyer, who is the former mayor of Las Vegas. Different Oscar Goodman, I believe, different family. I don't think that Oscar Goodman has any family in New Zealand.
I'm pretty sure they were joking.
No, I had like 5 people actually ask me that.
What's
like,
the Vegas
yesterday.
Oscar Goodman? I always liked that guy.
He's an interesting guy. Have you ever seen interviews of that guy? Is an interesting dude. I mean,
He is
when
interesting.
you go from being a mob lawyer to the mayor of Las Vegas, you're probably a pretty interesting dude.
Didn't he get into a fight with Kwame Kilpatrick or Kirkpatrick?
That I don't know.
Oh yeah, there was
Oscar
something.
Goodman's he's an interesting. I'll just leave it. He's an interesting dude. But But Brian, I'm glad you brought up this Oscar Goodman's hair, because that was by far the first thing I saw when someone posted he committed. I saw the picture, and immediately I go to hair, and I'm like, yeah, he said exactly what I was feeling. He is going to be the guy that every other school hates.
He looks more like a Wisconsin player. He looks like a guy who'd be playing at Wisconsin, and I'd probably hate him if he was at Wisconsin.
Well, that's the point, because those are the guys that when they go somewhere else, right? You hate them somewhere else, so you'd rather have them on your team, so you can have them be hated by everybody else.
Did you see the New York Times? Was it the New York Times article where they said one Kansas basketball player was making 1.2 million?
Was it there? Or was it the? I thought it was the Washington Post. I thought it was the. It might have been the Washington Post, but either way, they didn't name names. But
they didn't name names, but we had a pretty good guess as to who was making 1.2
exactly
million.
Who that is? Yes.
Yeah. So no wonder. No wonder.
Yeah, that's
good for him, really.
Would you have wanted him to stick around and be on last year's team? Like that would have just made it more depressing, right?
Yeah, we would have been 11-21 as opposed to 8-24.
Yeah,
or maybe
make the millions, Hunter.
Yeah, yeah.
We're back on radio in about 30 seconds.
It is interesting that, like, for center specifically, that you have a completely different type of guy who's very effective in college, who's just not of any interest to the NBA.
But 30 years ago would have been the number 1 overall pick in the NBA draft.
Right.
Absolutely the case. I mean, I think Walt Bellamy out in the
I always use Michael Olowokandi as my example, because that guy was not very good, but he was the number 1 pick because he was 7 feet tall and played center.
Right.
All right, guys.
He
We're
was
back in about 10 seconds. Yeah, totally worthless in the NBA. And he wasn't very good in college. So, all right, guys, stand by.
All right, back on radio in 5, 4, 3, 2.
And we are back with the MGoBlog Roundtable here on the Michigan Insider on the Big 1050, WTKA, online at thebig1050.com. We'll shift our conversation from basketball to football as we get ready for the battle for the Paul Bunyan Trophy. Michigan playing Michigan State this Saturday night at 7:30 at Michigan Stadium. But I actually want to look beyond that, guys, as we look at the Michigan football program more in a bigger picture. And some big news this week, Brian, as Andrew Babalola announced his commitment to the Michigan football program. The highest rated offensive linemen like ever were committed to the Michigan football program. That's a nice building block in what is actually going to be Sharon Moore's first actual recruiting class as the head coach at Michigan.
Yeah, and I think that's something you need. The ability to keep on these guys and recruit them and actually get a decent class in the face of a pretty rough season is impressive. And hopefully Michigan can stabilize here over an offseason, get some portal guys in, and continue with the coaching era that showed promise before the season and hopefully can show some promise next season.
Sorry.
I was just going
Babylon's
to
not
ask you a question. Sorry, Seth.
Go ahead.
I
Craig.
was asking. Let me ask you my question. You can talk
Sure.
about him. I mean, what did you think of the offensive line this week? Was there progress or not? Vance seemed to think not. I thought there was some, but what do you two guys think? Sorry, and you can put that in with Babaloa.
I mean, so Pro Football Focus came up with like an 82 pass protection grade from Gentry, which is exceptional as a single game number. I think they missed a couple of things. So there was one clear pressure that I don't think they recorded because the ball was out on a 3-step drop very quickly. And then there was another one that I don't know how they missed. I mean, I think they had him maybe for one pressure. So maybe they got that one. But I thought that he was good. Like, I thought he moved people. I thought his pass protection was at least reasonably good. And it's hard to understand why he wasn't playing earlier in the season. Crippen ups and downs. Like, I can see why they were trying Jadis out there because he had a tendency to get bowled back. There was a sack where it was a 3-man rush for Illinois, and he just got deposited in the quarterback's lap. Had his moments, wasn't terrible, but didn't really seem like a quantum leap from Jadis in a way that I think Gentry kind of did. I mean, it was just hard for Michigan to get anything going consistently because they had 2 drives in the first half. One was going to be a first down. The other one was going to be 3rd and 1, where they get terminated by a fumble. They're behind the 8 ball constantly because the pass game is a total disaster. And so anytime you end up in any sort of long or medium yardage situation, you're probably punting. And there was a lot of first down passing in this game, which didn't seem warranted by the situation. And so they were in situations where, you run for 6 yards, but it's on 2nd and 10. You're like, oh, well, is that good or not? I mean, this is a bad run defense. And so Michigan, I think, did a pretty good job at getting these guys blocked up, moving them and IDing their blocks. It's just there were a lot of other factors that conspired to make it so that Michigan didn't score any points. I mean, they went on 2 second-half drives that had a total of 27 plays between them, and they didn't get any points out of either drive. Is that on the offensive line? I don't think so. I think it's on mostly Jack Tuttle.
Yeah, the breakdown of this game, like from my perspective, is they found out what they can major in. They're a split zone team because you got Max Bredesen who can get an impact block on the edge, and that is something you can even run. Like at one point, they even run off of that. I think that was actually a power or counter, but it was that's what you are, right? Mullings down the middle, Bredesen with the lead block. That's who you are. And then they went away from it. And then they came back to it for those long drives, and they were actually getting somewhere. But, when they go play action, and this was a couple of the first down passes, they go play action, they get the reaction they want. Those linebackers are sucking down, right? And then they can't complete the pass. You have a wide open tight end. They don't complete the pass. You have a receiver who gets 2 steps down the sideline, passes 4 yards inside. You have a guy about to break loose for a touchdown, and the quarterback throws it right into the chest of a safety who's playing robber 10 yards in front of that. I mean, the level of bad in the passing game was just so high that even having a good, like, you could cheat against this rushing game. You can just bring everybody up and gamble that Michigan's not going to be able to complete a downfield pass, which is, I don't know where you go from that. You've tried 3 quarterbacks. I don't know if there's a solution. I don't think there's a solution on this team right now.
Yeah, I cut you off on Babaloa by trying to ask you a question. Did you have another thought on that, on him?
I mean, he's
Seth?
he's a guy it's good to have in the class.
Well, yeah, I don't think he's going to affect the team next year. I think that true freshman offensive lineman. I mean, Sam is like, man, if you can play a guy, you can play this guy. But he's kind of, the reason he's not the first overall recruit in the country is because he's got some development to go. I think that this is what we were hoping we'd have when Sharon Moore was hired, that, if anybody should be able to recruit the number 1 offensive lineman in the class every year, it's him. And that is the kind of guy that Michigan's not really gotten before. They've had developed their own. They've had some of their best offensive linemen have been, program historically have been like tight ends that they get bigger, right? But you watch him play basketball, and I remember when Jake Long committed, there was like a little M key or whatever the MPEGs that we pass around, right? Like those is like way back in the early internet days, and like somebody had like maybe it was a GIF or something of him slamming the basketball, and everyone got excited over that. And that's Babalola. He just has that athleticism. He could be a basketball player. He could be a power forward, and that's it's not something we've had very often.
Yeah, I heard Vance say that he felt like the O-line sort of let down Tuttle this week a bit. That's how I heard him, at least, which I didn't really see very much. I saw mostly Tuttle being a complete disaster.
I mean, there were moments where he got pressured. That's true. And a couple of them, I think, were on Tuttle. Like he was holding the ball when there were open receivers to find. There was a sack that it looked like Colson Loveland gave up, but Colson Loveland's like firing a defensive end inside, and Tuttle's on a half roll, and then he stops. And he's also got Samaj Morgan wide open. So, like, that might look like his offensive line letting him down, but he had a wide open wide receiver, and he's not running the play. So, I mean, to me, the level of protection he got in this game was not great, but it was fine. And then his throws were just way off. And there were a couple instances that on review I don't think are his fault. Like there's one that's way behind Loveland that I think Loveland needs to sit down against zone coverage. There's one that goes to the feet of Bredesen where I think it got deflected. So not everything that looked bad was on Tuttle, but his consistency with being able to actually find guys that were open was not good enough. And I mean, he fumbles again, so his ball security is bad. He throws 2 interceptions, one of which is called back for an irrelevant penalty, and both those interceptions are just horrible. So, I mean, he has, I guess, more upside than the other guys because he has a combination of mobility and an arm, but it's year 7 for him, and he's still throwing it directly at defenders repeatedly in a game. I just don't know, like, what you can expect, how you can expect him to improve. I mean, he's barely practiced for a year, right? He didn't play in spring practice. He mostly wasn't available during fall. And, the week of the Washington game, he was like, yeah, this is the first week I got any practice time. And it's like, okay, well, he looks like a guy who hasn't practiced in a long time.
One thing about football teams is they get better over the course, especially college football teams, get better over the course of the season. Everybody does. The whole thing shifts. And one thing about this team is that because they have to keep restarting, they're not getting better. So they look like they're getting worse. And I think that relative to their opponents, they're getting worse. I think this is a game that they probably would have been more competitive in earlier in the season. But Illinois is getting better. Altmaier's figured out what he's good at. They figured out ways that they can get around some of their weaknesses. Illinois figured out who they are.
They had 80 yards passing in this game, right? Like, the situation was that they had a pretty good game plan for getting some yards on the ground. They couldn't do anything in the air, and they only scored 21 points because Michigan turned the ball over twice, and the punter couldn't get it 30 yards down the field. So, like, in terms of like why this game was lost, it's 100% on the offense, and it's like 94% on the fact that the quarterback simply wasn't good enough. Like there's not really a whole lot of discussion to be had. The offensive line was fine, the running game was fine, but they turned the ball, they fumbled twice, they had an interception, and for most of the rest of the game, that the quarterback was not playing at a D1 level. So it's not complicated, and there's not really a whole lot of interest to be had here because everybody can see this. It's not like we're going to be like revealing things to the Michigan fan base. Like, well, guys, I don't know if you know this, but the quarterback play a little substandard this year. They know.
That's the problem. We're trying to we're trying to do high-end analysis on this team, and you said it's 100% on the offense. Not special teams was also terrible. But that's the thing. They had a field goal blocked. They have they can't punt the ball. the fake punt that's just great because everyone was saying at the time, "Oh man, it's a fake punt situation."
Well,
It's
yeah.
like,
If you're punting from the 50, like what is the upside of not being in punt safe? Like there's none. Because
yeah.
the number of punts that you're even going to be able to return is so minimal.
Well, I have a friend, Badger Ken, who is in diehard Wisconsin fan and never liked Bielema when he was there, and now really despises him. And he sent me an email about a minute before that happened and said, "If it's fourth near the 50, you guys better watch out for the fake punt." Right? And
I
bang
mean,
there. I mean,
everyone knew that going in
I
when they
know.
put on the uniforms, and they this was something I came out in the defense of UFR too. They ran a lot of stuff that we didn't see in previous Illinois games. I've watched, I think, 4 Illinois games this year for dumb reasons, and this was just a way more interesting offense. They ran things one time, or they ran things only 2 times, and then went on with something else. This was the game that Illinois was planning on, and the defense. You could have won this game 5-3 with the way this defense played. If this team could just, we're going to run the ball, but we can't throw the ball. Okay, our offense is not going to be that good, but we could punt it. I mean, if you had just one more thing working, and you weren't turning it over, and you're not punting it 30 yards, you're not setting them up in good positions, this defense could get you wins. It's a really bad mix when you're turning the ball over and they're starting on the 50 every single time. And it's like, well, all they have to do is come up with one play, right? Throw one pass under Jair Hill, who's still playing a little bit soft, and now they're in field goal range. It's very hard, or they get him off the field. Wink actually, I think he's really improved, and this is something we need to talk about a little because we've been so tough on Wink that I think especially in the bye week he got a better feel of who his players are. And the blitzes made a little more sense based off of who your guys are, right? They bring Barham and then he backs off. And when you see Barham coming, that's freaky. You're afraid. He's going to knock you over. And so you focus on him and you don't see that Mason Graham has bounced over 2 gaps and jumped into your gap. And Mason Graham, you cannot sleep on him either. So they're starting to use their players better. They're starting to be more judicious with how they blitz, and the blitzes were a lot more effective in this game. Problem is he saves 2 of his best blitzes. They get off the field, the punt team comes out, and then they get a fake punt for 36 yards, and now you're in the red zone. It's just a bad mix that's not showing off what this defense could do.
And they did it without Will Johnson for 3/4 of the game. Go ahead, Seth. Craig.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, I listened to Vance, and he said he thought the linebackers made some strides this week, and he thought the secondary was okay. He was disappointed with the defensive tackles. Did you see any of that? Because I don't know. I had a hard time finding that.
Well, the young defensive tackles, maybe.
They had a good game plan to attack the starters. I mean, they ran a straight up draw play a couple of times. I don't know what the last time I've seen a draw play in college football. But that worked because those guys get penetration and they really want to get upfield. And, Illinois comes into this game as mostly a passing offense. So I think they got some things tactically. And then they ran midline a couple of times, and Trey Pierce was too eager, but he's a guy getting his first real playing time. So I'm not too surprised about that.
When you say midline, might want to explain that a bit because it's pretty unusual to run.
Don't read the defensive tackle.
Right.
Yeah,
go ahead.
So instead of letting the defensive end go and reading him, you let a defensive tackle go and you read him. So Illinois did that productively with Altmaier a couple of times, and I sort of shook my fist at the heavens because it's like they're not an option team, and they have more ideas about running their quarterback than Michigan did with Alex Orji. And I was like, well, easy come, easy go, I guess.
Thoughts on the matchup for Saturday night, Seth?
State is a team that's gotten a lot better. I think they're very well coached. I really like Jonathan Smith. I like Joe Rossi. He's the guy he was Minnesota's defensive coordinator for a bunch of years. And remember, we always liked their secondary. They are still kind of a year 0 team. So they lost a lot of the players that they had last year. They're kind of rebuilt through the portal. Aiden Childs, everyone knows, he could explode in any direction in any given play. Nick Marsh man, he's going to bother us for a few years. That, he was the number one player in high school for a few years, and he's, 6'3", 209 freshman receiver. I really would have liked to have Will Johnson perfectly healthy in this game, because if you could take him away for 1 second, their offensive line is not good. They had to rebuild that through the portal as well. The right side of their line just gives up everything. They moved Brandon Baldwin, who was their left tackle last year, to guard, and he's even worse as a guard. And they've been moved some guys around. They've tried different players there, and they cannot get any protection. They do have a good running back, K'Ron Lynch Adams. He was playing for UMass for a few years. I think he was actually, I don't remember where he started originally, but he was he was Rutgers. He was playing for Rutgers originally. But he's a pretty good back. So I wish that I didn't feel like there was such a massive coaching advantage for Michigan State in this game, because this is the kind of games the state tends to win, even though they're 101st in S&P Plus offense, where Michigan's in the 70s. So, according to the fancy stats, their offense is worse than ours. Now, when you watch it on tape, that's not true at all. I think what's happening is Aiden Childs throws so many interceptions, and they're bad interceptions. So if this Michigan team was what we thought this Michigan team would be, I think they destroyed them. They'd run through that defensive line. They just kind of crush them on the ground, and then Aiden Childs would throw 3 interceptions because our coverages are really hard to figure out. I don't think that we're that team, and I think that is going to be very exploitable in this matchup.
Craig? You're muted again, Craig.
I agree that the Michigan State offensive line is the problem. I think if Michigan can keep Childs sort of inside of the tackle box and not let him roam around a lot, Michigan will win the game. He'll make mistakes. If they let him get out and scramble and run and get outside where he has looks where he can see the field, it's more problematic. At least that's how I see it.
Any thoughts on the game, Brian?
I mean, it really does come down to whether Childs can replicate his performance from last week, where he didn't turn the ball over in extremely goofy ways. He's obviously a talent, and obviously a guy who, when you look at EPA per play, that 101st does stick out, but it is based on just a large number of incredibly negative plays that they turn in. On a down-to-down basis, they've been fine. It's just they've had Jeff Sims with upside this year, and if he's going to do that, then I think Michigan can stick in this game and win if they get any sort of quarterback play. But it's hard to project that, right?
Is Tuttle the quarterback? I mean, that's what it seems to be.
It's 2 questions: is Tuttle the quarterback, and does it matter?
Right, I hear you, because it doesn't seem like there's any real place to turn. So
Sam said to play Warren and Orji and kind of split them up a little bit and play both.
It wouldn't surprise me if Warren starts. It's probably what I would do, but I'm not saying that's the answer. In that respect, it's just hard to know what Michigan should do, and it's impossible for me still, all of us, to understand how they came into the season knowing they didn't have a quarterback. And that one to me is mind-blowing. So I don't know.
Now we're just recovering. We're going over the same stuff again, because it's just you look at this team. What are they? They don't have a quarterback. Okay, why don't we have a quarterback? Well, because Harbaugh and everything, and we're just going in circles, and we're going to do this every week, and that's the problem. When it's so obvious, there's not a whole lot of analysis that you can add on top of this. This is who they are.
Fair point.
And the question is, can they play Jaden Davis? Well, there's 5 games left. When there's 4 games left, maybe they'll play Jaden Davis. But he's getting a redshirt this year, period. So this is what they are. This is who they are. All right, the things that they can tweak are okay, maybe on defense, let's be a little bit more interesting on 2-minute drills, because they seem to just play off man and get chewed up for 13 yards at a time. And I think that's just Wink Martindale's so used to the clock running on first downs that's the difference, right? He gets them down to 30 seconds, and in the NFL that would have been 0 seconds. It's just little things like that can get better, but this team's not getting better, and that's really frightening me, because they're just, if you're spinning your wheels, right? If they were bad and they were getting better or at least building towards something, spinning your wheels is really
I
frightening.
mean, you just said
That's,
that.
I hate to cut you off, but that's a really depressing way to end it. But that is how we're going to end it here on the MGoBlog Roundtable. Sam will be back in the air chair tomorrow, and he'll be back with all the guys for the roundtable next week here on the show. I want to thank Brian, Craig, and Seth for joining me here on the show. And thanks to all of you for listening. I'm heading over to the Chrysler Center for the celebration of life for Greg Harden. We'll see everybody tomorrow here on the